With the imminent retirement of Workflow Rules and Process Builder, there's never been a better time to start planning your migration to Salesforce Flow. But where do you start and what best practices do you need to be aware of? I'm Andrew, Salesforce Technical Instructor at Salesforce Ben. Our mission is to help you advance your Salesforce career. So whether you're just starting out or have a few years under your belt, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our extensive resources on salesforceben.com. Without delay, let's jump into our best practices to migrate to Salesforce Flow. With Salesforce retiring both Workflow Rules and Process Builder, Flow Builder is the future. If you haven't already started, now is the time to start learning Flow. There are plenty of resources available, including Trailhead and our Ultimate Salesforce Flow Foundation course by Tim Combridge. Check it out via the link in the video description. You cannot migrate your automations to Flow without planning. You can take different approaches with your planning, but there are some key things to keep in mind. You need to think about how the current automation is being launched, what object or objects it interacts with, what actions does the automation perform, and are there any other tools to consider, such as installed packages. Finally, and in my opinion most importantly, the order of execution. Once you've taken these into account, you can begin to plan your migration. Drawing out the flow will help you visualize how the information needs to progress through the flow. I normally do this on my iPad, but a pen and paper will work just as well. Planning an object by object basis is also a good way of breaking up your project into smaller, more manageable tasks. The order of execution is really important when migrating your automations into Flow. You need to know when the workflow rules or process builders would run and make sure when they are moved into Flow, the overall process still works as expected. When planning your migration, I would recommend referring to the Salesforce Ben order of execution infographic and mapping out where the old automations run compared to the new ones. For example, a workflow rule comes in before after triggers in the order of execution. If this is then migrated to a before save flow, it will come before both before triggers and after triggers. This could impact other parts of your workflow that you may not have expected, which shows how important testing is with your migration to Flow. It is inevitable that your flow will be viewed by other Salesforce administrators and potentially consultants. You should always create supporting documentation to make it easier for them to understand what your flow does and the key elements and functions that it performs to make their job of maintaining the org easier. One simple thing you should do when building or editing a flow is to ensure that each description value is filled with a meaningful description of what the particular element is used for. Record-triggered flows run automatically when a record is created, updated, or deleted. Depending on what you need to perform, it is possible to choose the flow to run before or after the record is saved. There are two approaches you can take depending on the complexity of your org. Salesforce recommends having a maximum of one type of each record-triggered flow per object. So for the account object, you will have an account record created flow, an account record updated flow, an account record created or updated flow, and an account record deleted flow. This works in a similar fashion to Apex trigger best practices, where it is recommended you have one trigger per object. The other approach is to break your automations into smaller, more manageable flows and subflows. You can then use the Flow Orchestrator tool to set the order in which these flows are fired, giving you greater control over your overall workflow. Before save flows allow you to update the record that created the triggering record, similar to how a workflow rule works. A before save flow runs 10 times faster than an after save flow, so utilizing them when you can will massively improve performance. After save flows are far more powerful than their before save counterparts. They allow you to create, update, and delete records and perform actions such as call and action or launch a subflow. A big difference between these and process builders is that an after save flow can update a record that has no relationship with the trigger record. This isn't the case with process builder, where a relationship between objects is always required. Variables are your temporary containers for values that you will use in your flow. There are many different types of variables and they hold specific types of values for you. On the other hand, record variables hold all field values for a certain type of record. There will be cases where you'll want to hold multiple values in a container, These containers are called collections. Collections hold a number of values for you to process in your flow. Collection actions and elements are limited in flows, therefore you often need to loop through these variables to process each member one by one. Loops are essential when you want to process multiple related records. There are limited operations you can perform on multiple records with Flow. In most cases, you need to loop through the records to process them. Flows have limits, and these limits are often associated with the number of elements used and the number of elements of a particular type executed. When you use loops in your flow, the elements inside the loop will be executed every iteration of the loop, and the number of iterations is often not known at the time of build. In addition, if you make a mistake, if something goes wrong in the loop, you will make a mess of every iteration your loop runs. You will have a more significant cleanup to deal with afterwards. Therefore, you need to be very careful when designing loops containing loops. Flow is a very powerful automation tool with a lot of the same features of Apex. Now, you can't move any Apex code into your production environment without passing test classes. However, with Flow Builder, this isn't the case. You can build directly in production. This is a huge no-no. Flow Builder is a developer tool and should be treated as such. Q, testing in Flow. Flow Builder now has a built-in testing and debug tool that you can use to test your flows before activating them. This allows you to create tests in a similar way to creating a test class with Apex. You can set your test details, trigger and path, the initial triggering record and the test assertions. These are all saved within the flow, so you don't need to worry about creating new records when moving the flow through your sandboxes for testing. Now is the time to start migrating your current automations into Flow Builder. Planning is absolutely key to this. The more thoroughly you plan, the less likely you are to have any issues in the long run. Remember the order of execution. It really is important in making sure your overall processes continue to run as intended. Most importantly, don't rush your migration. Your current workflow rules or process builders aren't suddenly going to stop working, so make sure you take your time and use all of the tools at your disposal. Like, comment and subscribe to stay up to date on the latest from Salesforce.